Good evening again from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. Contrary to my usual habit, I'm going to try to speak in British English because my topic is possible religious and or moral allusions in The Lord of the Rings. This book that was published as a trilogy originally in the 1950s or in the 1950s and 1960s, the first volume being The Fellowship of the Ring, the second volume The Two Towers, and the third volume The Return of the King. Its author, John Ronald Reuel or Royal Tolkien, was born in 1892 and died in 1973. He was a rather voluminous writer. He wrote many private letters. Then he wrote, in addition to the Lord of the Rings, numerous other mythological tales that one of his sons, Christopher Tolkien, then published after his father's death and had to edit in many places, such as The Silmarillion, which focused on the mythological story of the Middle-earth and Valinor, the Blessed Realm, in the First Ages, and then of Númenor, that island kingdom between the Middle-earth in the east and the Blessed Realm of Valinor in the west, that was eventually then engulfed by the Great Sea towards the end of the Second Age. And then the Book of Unfinished Tales, the Book of Lost Tales, and so forth. Although he stated, Professor Tolkien, who by the way was a close colleague and friend of C.S. Lewis and was one of the two men who urged Lewis in or around 1931 to become a Christian, stated in his foreword to The Fellowship of the Ring and to The Lord of the Rings, by extension, as for any inner meaning or message, it, meaning the book, has in the intention of the author none. It is neither allegorical nor topical. Its sources are things long before in mind, the crucial chapter, The Shadow of the Past, or in some cases already written, and little or nothing in it was modified by the war that began in 1939, meaning the Second World War, or its sequels. The real war does not resemble the legendary war in its process or its conclusion. If it had inspired or directed the development of the legend, then certainly the ring would have been seized and used against Sauron, or Sauron, meaning the Dark Lord, or the enemy with a capital E. He would not have been annihilated but enslaved, and Barad-dûr would not have been destroyed but occupied. Of course, there would have been a clear allegory. Sauron would have resembled Adolf Hitler. Mordor would have resembled Nazi Germany. Barad-dûr would probably have resembled Berlin. If not, then Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat in Bavaria, southern Germany, or then the Wolfschanz, or Wolf's Lair, in then East Prussia, which is now in Poland. Saruman, failing to get possession of the ring, would in the confusion and treacheries of the time have found in Mordor the missing links in his own researches into ring lore, and before long he would have made a great ring of his own with which to challenge the self-styled ruler of Middle-earth. In that conflict both sides would have held hobbits in hatred and contempt. They would not long have survived even as slaves. I cordially dislike allegory in all its manifestations and always have done so since I grew old and wary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experience of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory. but the one resides in the freedom of the reader and the other in the purposed domination of the author. An author cannot, of course, remain wholly unaffected by his experience, but the ways in which a story germ uses the soil of experience are extremely complex, and attempts to define the process are at best guesses from evidence that is inadequate and ambiguous. It is also false, though naturally attractive, when the lives of an author and critic have overlapped, to suppose that the movements of thought or the events of times common to both were necessarily the most powerful influences. As the years go by, it seems now often forgotten that to be caught in youth by 1914, the year when the First World War began, and Tolkien turned 22 that year, was no less hideous an experience than to be involved in 1939 and the following years. By 1918, all but one of my close friends were dead. Or to take a less grievous matter, it has been supposed by some that the scouring of the Shire, the second last actual chapter of the book, aside from, of course, the rather long appendices, reflects the situation in England at the time when I was finishing my tale. It does not. It is an essential part of the plot foreseen from the outset, though in the event modified by the character of Saruman, as developed in the story without, need I say, any allegorical significance or contemporary political reference whatsoever. It has indeed some basis in experience, though slender, for the economic situation was entirely different and much further back. The country in which I lived in childhood, by the way, South Africa, which at the time was a British colony, was being shabbily destroyed before I was 10. And why? Because the so-called Boer War was going on, where the British army, then British colonial army or imperial army, defeated the Boers or Afrikaners, that is white settlers of South Africa of Dutch origin. In days when motor cars were rare objects, I had never seen one, and men were still building suburban railways. And then we'll go to The Shadow of the Past, where I think for the first time we find some moral or perhaps even religious themes, although of course if Professor Tolkien were still alive he would probably disapprove of these interpretations and would rather let each reader draw his or her own conclusions of the book's possible inner meanings. Gandalf, that wise wizard who was actually the only one of the 5 wizards sent by the Valar, or the Guardians of the World, to the Middle Earth, was it around the year 1000 or 1100 of the Third Age, to remain faithful and to return to Valinor as he did at the end of the Third Age, over 2000 or some 2000 years after being sent. And finally, in April 3018, Gandalf, after an absence of over 9 years, returned to Hobbiton, the chief village of the Shire, or at least the most important one. And then he discussed the great rings, the rings of power that had been forged by the elven smiths of Eregion, except for one, of course, the one ring that Sauron the Dark Lord had forged in the fiery mountain Orodruin. Here I would see some kind of religious or at least a moral allusion. A mortal Frodo who keeps one of the great rings does not die, but he does not grow or obtain more life. He merely continues until at last every minute is a weariness. And if he often uses the ring to make himself invisible, he fades. He becomes in the end invisible permanently, and walks in the twilight under the eye of the dark power that rules the rings. Yet sooner or later if he is strong or well-meaning to begin with, but neither strength nor good purpose will last, sooner or later the dark power will devour him. Well, those people who believe in the realities of sin and hardening of heart, the devil and hell, and God's righteous judgment to those who refuse to repent, would see some kind of religious allusion there. Although, of course, it could be interpreted in many other ways as well. Then we go on, scrolling down this one. And then Gandalf's genuine moral concern for the hobbits in general and for Frodo, who had kept the Great Ring in his possession already for over 16 years at the time of this crucial conversation. Ever since Bilbo left, I have been deeply concerned about you and all these charming, absurd, helpless hobbits. It would be a grievous blow to the world if the Dark Power overcame the Shire, and if all your kind, jolly, stupid Bolgers, Hornblowers, Boffins, Bracegirdles, and the rest, not to mention the ridiculous Bagginses, became enslaved. And then of course this epical poem. Three rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. And once again, those readers who are Christians or otherwise religious people would see the rings as allusions to various sins that tempt people. This is the Master Ring, Gandalf continued, the one ring to rule them all. This is the one ring that he, meaning Sauron, lost many ages ago to the great weakening of his power. He greatly desires it, but he must not get it. And then we go on. Then there's, in this short passage or paragraph, some kind of allusion to the Christian doctrine of predestination, that God has somehow preordained the destiny of people, at least in some way. Even the committed Bible-believing Christians, of course, disagree on that point. The Arminians believe that it is more a form of foreknowledge coupled with prevenient grace, that no person is automatically, absolutely, before even he was created, doomed to lose his or her opportunity to be saved and to spend eternity in hell, while the Calvinists and Reformed Christians believe that God has chosen some to salvation before he even created the universe, and then others to damnation. The trick, of course, is that only God knows precisely who the elect are. But I'll read the paragraph. I can put it no plainer than by saying that Bilbo, meaning Frodo's adoptive father, was meant to find the ring and not by its maker, in which case you also were meant to have it. And that may be an encouraging thought. Frodo protested. It is not, though I am not sure that I understand you. But how have you learned all this about the ring and about Gollum? Do you really know it, or are you just guessing still? And then Gandalf answered, I knew much and I have learned much, but I am not going to give an account of all my doings to you. And then so that crucial paragraph where Frodo says, or one crucial paragraph, but not yet the one where Frodo agrees to become the ring bearer for the first time. In other words, to destroy it. But this is terrible, cried Frodo. Far worse than the worst that I had imagined from your hints and warnings. Oh, Gandalf, best of friends, what am I to do? For now I am really afraid. What am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature, meaning Gollum, when he had a chance. Pity. It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil, and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. I am sorry, said Frodo, but I am frightened, and I do not feel any pity for Gollum. You have not seen him, Gandalf broke in. No, and I don't want to, said Frodo. I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those terrible deeds? Now, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc, and just an enemy. He deserves death. Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not least. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. At the time, Gollum was already at least 580 years old, probably even older, because the ring had prolonged his life unnaturally. The wood elves have him in prison, but they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts. Gollum, of course, was the creature who, around the year 2463, had throttled to death his friend Déagol, because Déagol had refused to give him that ring. And Gollum had quite soon thereafter been banished by his strict grandmother, and had eventually found his way to the Misty Mountains because he had begun to hate the sunshine. He wanted to be away from it. And then there was, and well, apparently by chance, Bilbo, when he got lost from his 13 dwarf companions, Thorin Oakenshield and 12 other dwarves, in the Misty Mountains, or inside them, then he chanced to meet Gollum. Then they had that riddle game, and at last Bilbo then escaped wearing that ring because Gollum couldn't see him. And then eventually it was that Frodo succumbed to the lure of the ring, the power of the ring, and declared the ring to be his own in Samath Naur, or the Chambers of Fire, inside Orodruin. And then Gollum, who had come there to ambush Frodo, knocked Frodo's faithful servant Samwise Gamgee to the ground. Samwise lost his consciousness for a while. Gollum attacked Frodo and eventually bit Frodo's ring finger off, and therefore got the ring. Frodo was unable to offer resistance, having lost his other middle finger. But Gollum then, gloating over the prize, he stepped too far on the edge of that cliff, and then fell down into the fires of the cracks of doom, and died, and the ring was destroyed, and therefore Sauron and his power were unmade. Sauron did survive as a useless, powerless spirit, unable to take shape, and Sauron's kingdom also collapsed. And then we can say that yes, Frodo failed actually in his task, but then Gollum completed the quest against his desire, because he would have wanted to have the ring back. And well, here once again, the Christian and other religious readers might see some kind of hand of God, in that even evil people, evil beings, like in this case Gollum, can be put to serve the greater good by God, even when some children of God, and Frodo could symbolize a Christian, fail. And then when Frodo had intended to fling the ring from himself into the very hottest part of his small fire, which actually, according to Gandalf, would not have melted even ordinary gold, he had then put it back in his pocket, and Gandalf said, "I could not make you except by force, which would break your mind. But as for breaking the ring, force is useless. There is only one way to find the cracks of doom in the depths of Orodruin, the Fire Mountain, and cast the ring in there. If you really wish to destroy it, to put it beyond the grasp of the enemy forever." And then Frodo cried, "I do really wish to destroy it. Or, well, to have it destroyed. I'm not made for perilous quests. I wish I had never seen the ring." Why did it come to me? Why was I chosen? And here we could see an allusion to this dilemma of predestination by God, although this was possibly not, or maybe even probably not, what Tolkien intended, in order not to make the Lord of the Rings appear like a religious allegorical story, similar to the Chronicles of Narnia, written by his good friend C.S. Lewis. Such questions cannot be answered, said Gandalf, so this could be an allusion to God's infinite wisdom, of which we can only understand a part during this life, and if by God's grace we go to heaven, then we will understand much more, at least. You may be sure that it was not for any merit that others do not possess, not for power or wisdom at any rate, but you have been chosen, and you must therefore use such strength and heart and wits as you have. So this would be another reference to that Calvinist Reformed doctrine of predestination, that the elect definitely do not in any way deserve their election to salvation, but it is purely by the grace of God that they are saved and remain saved for all eternity. Okay. Let's scroll down to the same place. And then Frodo, discouraged as he was, shouted, "But I have so little of any of these things!" And then tried to persuade Gandalf. "You are wise and powerful. Will you not take the ring?" And then Gandalf, horrified, shouted, "No! With that power I should have power too great and terrible, and over me the ring would gain a power still greater and more deadly. Do not tempt me, for I do not wish to become like the Dark Lord himself. Yet the way of the ring to my heart is by pity, pity for weakness and the desire of strength to do good. Do not tempt me. I dare not take it, not even to keep it safe, unused. The wish to wield it would be too great for my strength. I shall have such need of it. Great perils lie before me." And Gandalf would be like a wise Christian or a wise other religious person who would refuse the temptation to take some outwardly powerful object or means of outwardly performing much good that would eventually then corrupt his or her mind, soul and spirit. Then Frodo said, for example, "I should like to save the Shire," meaning the main region in the northwest of the Middle-earth, Eriador, "if I could, though there have been times when I thought the inhabitants too stupid and dull for words, and have felt that an earthquake or an invasion of dragons might be good for them. But I don't feel like that now. I feel that as long as the Shire lies behind safe and comfortable, I shall find wandering more bearable. I shall know that somewhere there is a firm foothold, even if my feet cannot stand there again. Of course, I have sometimes thought of going away, but I imagined that as a kind of holiday, a series of adventures like Bilbo's or better ending in peace. But this would mean exile, a flight from danger into danger, drawing it after me. And I suppose I must go alone if I am to do that and save the Shire. But I feel very small and very uprooted and, well, desperate. The enemy is so strong and terrible." And in this one, this passage clearly Frodo displayed a sense of moral responsibility. And then Gandalf was amazed. "My dear Frodo, hobbits really are amazing creatures, as I have said before. You can learn all that there is to know about their ways in a month, and yet after 100 years they can still surprise you at a pinch. I hardly expected to get such an answer, not even from you." But Bilbo made no mistake in choosing his heir, though he little thought how important it would prove. Okay, I'll continue this talk in another video.